Racist and corrupt cops arrested and humiliated a black woman in public, without knowing she was a high-ranking federal prosecutor. It happened fast, cruelly, and under the glare of gas station floodlights, as cars passed and strangers watched, unsure of whether to intervene or stay silent. Her crime: driving a clean luxury SUV in the wrong part of town. Her skin was too dark, her confidence too firm, and her silence too threatening. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't ask if she needed help. They didn't even ask her name. They just pointed. They just assumed. And within seconds, they had her handcuffed against her own car, face pressed to the window, body tense and frozen in disbelief, while the gas nozzle still clicked in place behind her, forgotten. "Get out of the car." "Now," one officer shouted, yanking the door open before she could even respond, as if her calm, her refusal to panic, only infuriated him more. She asked what she was being accused of. He laughed. "Driving while black in a Benz, what else? You think that's your car, ma'am?" And when she tried, just tried, to speak, the other officer interrupted her. "I don't care who you are. We've seen your type before. Fake tears. Fake lives. Fake stories. Save it for the judge." She didn't cry. Not in that moment. But something cracked inside her. Not just rage, something deeper. Something older. Because this wasn't the first time. Not the first time the world tried to shrink her, erase her. But this was the first time someone put cuffs on her wrists in front of a crowd that didn't say a word. Mothers with children looked away. Men at the pumps pretended not to see. A white couple filmed it from across the lot but didn't intervene. And in that exact second, she realized, she wasn't just humiliated. She was being erased. They searched her car without cause, claiming it fit a description. One of them held up her leather bag like it was a weapon. Another mocked the suits folded in the back seat, still on dry cleaner hangers. "A lawyer?" "Yeah, sure you are," he scoffed, laughing with the partner who tightened her cuffs just a bit more, enough to hurt. Enough to show her who was in charge. They didn't know who they were touching. They didn't care. Because in their world, she was no one. Just another suspect. Another, mouthy woman, who didn't know her place. They called for backup, for show, to escalate. And she stood there in silence, feeling the heat of humiliation burning into her skin like the summer pavement under her heels. No badge. No rights. No name. Just a body to be controlled. But here's what they didn't know. 9 minutes later, the gas station turned into something else entirely. The scene flipped. Sirens returned, but this time not for her. Black SUVs rolled in with tinted windows. Men and women in federal jackets stormed the scene with purpose. And suddenly, the questions were for them, not her. Names. Badge numbers. Reports. Bodycam footage. One by one, the officers who mocked her were pulled aside. And that's when it happened, the shift. The recognition in their eyes. The crack in their voices. The moment they realized just how badly they had messed up. And for the first time, they begged. But why did they beg? Why did it all change so fast? Why did the same woman they humiliated without hesitation now hold the power to end their careers, their freedom, their lives as they knew them? And more importantly, how much of this was part of her plan all along? Stay until the end. Because this story is not about pity. It's not about revenge either. It's about truth. It's about justice. It's about every time they underestimated her, and every second they'll regret it. At Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against all forms of racism and discrimination. If you're a black viewer, know that your life, your voice, and your story matter deeply. Here, you're seen, respected, and valued. This story is for you, and for everyone who believes in justice, truth, and change. Stick around, this one's powerful. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories that matter. Enjoy the story. Her name was Asha Monroe. 36. Born and raised in the heart of Atlanta but hardened in the courtrooms of D.C., she was the kind of woman who didn't just survive the system, she learned to master it. Asha was brilliant in a way that made people uncomfortable. Her words were sharp, her memory was surgical, and her presence was something you couldn't ignore. Tall, elegant, and deliberate in every move she made, she commanded silence without ever needing to raise her voice. Her skin, deep and smooth as polished mahogany, wasn't just a symbol of pride, it was a constant reminder to her and to others of the line she walked daily, between being feared and being dismissed. She had built her career brick by brick, often in rooms where she was the only black woman, the youngest person, and the one most doubted. And that made her sharper. Hungrier. More exacting. She didn't beg for respect, she earned it. And sometimes, she demanded it. Asha had risen through the Department of Justice like a quiet storm. Not with loud ambition, but with results. Federal Prosecutor with a spotless record, she'd sent drug lords, dirty politicians, and corrupt CEOs to prison without blinking. She wasn't flashy, she didn't care for TV interviews or LinkedIn fanfare. But inside the DOJ, her name carried weight. People knew if Asha Monroe was on the case, someone powerful was about to fall. Her record was built on preparation, patience, and an almost terrifying sense of justice. She didn't care about applause, she cared about making it right. And yet, outside the courtroom, she was warm. Not soft, but real. She cared deeply about the lives her work affected, about the black girls she mentored, about the weight her name could carry in communities where names like hers weren't supposed to matter. She lived alone by choice in a brownstone just outside Chicago, having transferred there 8 months ago on a high-level federal investigation that had not yet gone public. Her life was organized, minimal, intentional. No wasted time. No wasted energy. Weekends were for yoga, long drives, and Sunday calls with her father back in Atlanta, a retired firefighter who still struggled to understand the world his daughter had climbed into. Her mother had passed when Asha was just a teenager, and ever since, she'd taken her pain and turned it into precision. She read people fast. Too fast, sometimes. She trusted few. And she had reason to. On that Friday evening, the air was heavy with late summer heat, the kind that makes the sky look like it's holding a secret. Asha had left the office early, not in a rush but with purpose. She had a plan, a quiet one. No briefcase, no badge, just her and the smooth hum of her black Mercedes SUV rolling through a less familiar part of town. Her GPS was leading her toward the edge of Aurora, Illinois, a place she rarely had a reason to visit. A friend's daughter had called her, scared, panicked, something about a landlord who was threatening eviction, an illegal one, and needed quick legal advice. Asha didn't hesitate. She wasn't in court. She wasn't on the clock. But justice wasn't something she turned on and off. The gas tank blinked low just as she crossed into a quiet neighborhood with wide streets and a silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt watched. She pulled into a gas station on the corner of an empty intersection, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in 2 decades. The neon lights flickered. A group of teenagers sat on the curb nearby. A patrol car parked 2 pumps down. She took a breath. This wasn't unfamiliar to her. It wasn't new. But still, she felt her posture shift, her awareness tighten. She scanned her surroundings. She always did. What she didn't notice, not at first, was the way the 2 officers in the patrol car had turned their heads toward her the second she stepped out. They didn't move. Not yet. But they were watching. A tall black woman in a luxury vehicle, dressed in tailored jeans, a white blouse, gold hoops. Hair in a bun. No obvious badge. No visible purpose. Their eyes narrowed. Their engine clicked to life. Asha was leaning back against the driver's side when they approached. One on each side. Neither smiled. "Is this your vehicle, ma'am?" the first one asked, already condescending, his hand resting near his holster, not casually. "Yes, it is," she replied, her voice calm but direct. "Is there a problem?" He looked at his partner and gave a smirk. "Can I see your license and registration?" She reached inside, slowly, deliberately, just like she'd been taught to since she was 16. No sudden moves. No sarcasm. She handed them over. "Where are you headed?" the second cop asked, eyes not on her but scanning the back seat. Her laptop bag. Her files. Her blazer. "Meeting someone," she said, refusing to elaborate. He didn't like that. "You look nervous," he said, baiting her. "I'm aware of my rights," she responded. "I'd like to know why I'm being questioned." It was enough. Enough to tip them over the edge. "Step out of the vehicle," the first one said, already opening the door. "There's no probable cause, now," he barked, loud enough to draw attention from the teens across the lot. That was when it shifted. One pulled her out, the other grabbed her wrist. She didn't resist. She didn't run. She just stood still, frozen in disbelief, in betrayal, in something deeper than fear. She looked around. People saw. People knew. But no one moved. The cuffs were tight. The shame was tighter. They asked her nothing. They told her nothing. They made jokes. They made assumptions. They searched her vehicle with no warrant. Claimed it fit the description of a stolen car. Claimed she fit the description of a suspected dealer in the area. When she tried to explain who she was, one of them laughed. "Sure you are, ma'am. Let me guess, the president's lawyer too." She didn't speak after that. She just stared. Past them. Past the crowd. Past the moment. And this is where things begin. Because those two officers, Officer Brett Carlson and Officer Darren Wolf, weren't just wrong. They were dirty. Known to cut corners, plant charges, and bend the law when it suited them. And for months, Asha Monroe had been part of a sealed investigation into abuses exactly like this. Just not here. Not yet. She hadn't come for them. But they found her. What they didn't know was that her SUV had a silent panic protocol. A GPS ping that alerted federal servers if she was detained without authorization. What they didn't know was that everything they were doing was being recorded. And what they really didn't know, what would destroy them minutes later, was that the woman they thought was another faceless arrest was the one person who could dismantle everything they'd built. But for now, all they knew was her silence. All she knew was the weight of history pressing on her chest. And somewhere, down the street, a black SUV was turning the corner, headed toward the gas station with a name they should have asked for before the cuffs. Because when power is misused, and justice is twisted, there's only one thing more dangerous than a victim with nothing to lose, a prosecutor with everything to prove. Asha sat in the back of the patrol car, hands still cuffed, wrists burning, breathing shallow but steady. The door had been slammed shut without a word, and through the narrow mesh barrier, she could hear Carlson and Wolf chuckling in front, talking about dinner plans like they hadn't just violated every constitutional right she owned. The windows were half-rolled, letting in the sticky summer air along with the soft sound of tires against pavement and the faint hum of a radio dispatch. Her phone was gone. Her ID still sat in the front seat of her car, untouched, ignored. She had spoken no further, not out of fear, but out of calculation. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Every second ticking by was being noted, logged, measured. Every sound. Every look. She didn't need to react. She needed to remember. Carlson lit a cigarette outside the vehicle, pacing, smug, while Wolf pretended to scroll through some kind of database on the patrol laptop. Every so often, Wolf glanced back at her in the rearview mirror. There was no fear in his eyes, just laziness and ego, the look of someone who'd done this too many times and gotten away with it. That's what stung most. The routine of it. The efficiency of the violence. They weren't even excited about it. She wasn't a chase, a threat, a case. She was just part of the day. You know, Wolf muttered without turning around, you'd make things a lot easier if you just admitted it. The car. The drugs. Whatever it is. Don't try to pull the lawyer card. We've seen that before. Carlson laughed through a puff of smoke and leaned down to the window. Or maybe she thinks she's Oprah. You think being black and rich makes you special? Makes you untouchable? He crouched a bit closer. Let me give you a hint, out here, we don't care what you say you are. Out here, you're just another, but he didn't finish. Because in that exact moment, Wolf's radio crackled with sudden urgency. A new voice. Stern. Not from dispatch. A tone that neither of them had heard in a long time. Unit 504, confirm your location immediately and status of current detainment. Over. Wolf blinked, confused. 504. We're at 91st and River. Routine stop. Suspect in custody. No backup required. Over. There was a pause. Then, stand by. Officers en route. Carlson straightened. What the hell is that about? Wolf shrugged. Maybe a supervisor wants a ride along, he said, trying to sound casual but clearly rattled. Asha's eyes didn't move. She stayed quiet. But inside, her pulse shifted. Because she recognized that voice. She recognized the weight behind those words. Things were starting to move. Minutes passed. Wolf fiddled with the computer. Carlson stepped inside the car, slamming the door harder than necessary. You think someone's coming to save you, he sneered at her through the mesh. You think there's gonna be a protest, a rally, maybe a damn parade? His tone got colder. This is real life, sweetheart. And in real life, nobody cares what happens to people like you. Asha tilted her head just slightly, met his eyes in the mirror. Then you should start worrying. Carlson laughed, but there was a slight hesitation now. He started the engine, but didn't pull off. And then they saw them. Two black SUVs, windows tinted, no sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet, deliberate presence. They pulled into the gas station with surgical precision, boxing in the patrol car on both sides. The back doors opened. Four federal agents stepped out, all in plain clothes, badges displayed. One of them, a tall woman with slick back hair and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, walked directly toward the car. Carlson opened his door. Can I help you? He asked, trying to sound like he still had authority, still had control. The woman held up her badge. Agent Ramirez, Department of Justice. We're here on urgent internal affairs protocol. Step out of the vehicle. Now. Wolf stood frozen. What's this about? The agent didn't blink. You've unlawfully detained a federal official. You're being recorded. This is your one chance to cooperate. The silence that followed was dense, charged. Carlson looked at Wolf. Wolf looked at Asha. And Asha, for the first time, allowed herself a slow breath. Still handcuffed, still seated, she spoke. I'd like my credentials returned. Ramirez opened the door, removed the cuffs, and handed Asha her badge, gold, heavy, federal. Wolf's face went pale. Carlson stepped back like he'd been slapped. I didn't know, Carlson stammered, eyes darting between the agents. Because you didn't ask, Asha replied coldly. But this wasn't the moment yet. This wasn't justice. Not yet. This was tension. This was the unraveling. Because as Carlson and Wolf began their pathetic apologies, stumbling over words, trying to claim confusion, trying to find ground. The real wave was still coming. One of the agents approached Ramirez, whispered something, and handed over a folder. Ramirez scanned it quickly and her face darkened. She turned to Carlson. "You're Officer Brett Carlson, badge number 2883. He nodded, mouth dry. "And you, Officer Darren Wolf, badge 3019. Wolf nodded, sweating. Ramirez raised the folder slightly. "You two are part of an active investigation. We have reason to believe this incident may not be isolated." She gestured toward the SUV. "You'll be coming with us." Carlson laughed nervously. "Wait a second, no one said anything about, you're not under arrest yet," Ramirez interrupted, calm as ice. "But you are being detained under federal protocol for further questioning. You'll surrender your weapons and ride in the vehicle behind me. Refusal to comply will be treated as obstruction." The moment hung in the air, thick, boiling. Carlson's jaw clenched. Wolf tried to speak, but nothing came. Asha stood silently by Ramirez's side, watching. Not smiling. Not gloating. Just present. Like a mirror showing them exactly who they were. And yet, even with their humiliation beginning, even with the walls closing in, they still didn't understand the full weight of what they had done. They didn't know the extent of the investigation. They didn't know the recordings. The data. The patterns. They didn't know who had been watching. Or for how long. But they were about to. Because the federal agents weren't the end of the story, they were just the next page. And what came after that, what was waiting behind those sealed doors and classified files, was something even they couldn't talk their way out of. The only question now was, how deep did the damage go? And when the truth was finally exposed, who would be left standing? Because karma doesn't knock. It arrives. And it had just pulled up at pump number 5. The hallway inside the federal building was silent, lined with glass-walled conference rooms, closed doors, and the quiet authority of polished floors and sharp suits. At the far end of that hall, behind a reinforced security door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," sat a room not on any public map. Inside, the lighting was soft but clinical, and the air buzzed faintly from the hum of surveillance equipment. 2 chairs faced each other across a polished metal table. On one side, Asha stood, sleeves rolled, blazer off, calm but alert. On the other side, Carlson sat stiff, arms crossed, face flushed, his arrogance finally giving way to the slow, creeping dread that had been tightening around him since the moment the cuffs were removed from her wrists and placed into his world instead. Wolf sat across another table in an adjacent room, already broken down, visibly sweating, a federal agent leaning against the wall beside him, arms folded, silent. Asha didn't sit yet. She placed a thick file gently on the table in front of Carlson, letting it make a deliberate, weighty sound. He stared at it like it was radioactive. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, not coldly, not yet, but with a calm that wrapped tightly around the tension in the room. He said nothing. His jaw tensed, and his eyes flicked toward the mirrored glass behind her. She didn't wait for an answer. "This is a record of every stop you've made in the last 18 months. Every body cam download, every patrol log, every complaint filed and buried. You've detained 47 black and brown individuals without cause. 17 of them were minors. 3 of them are now suing the city. And one of them," she tapped the file gently with her finger, "was hospitalized after your so-called routine traffic check. You remember Deshaun Hill?" Carlson blinked, clearly caught off guard. "He's 17. Honor roll. Soccer captain. No priors. You broke his collarbone. Your report said he resisted. Funny thing is, his girlfriend filmed everything from the passenger seat. We only got that video last month because she was afraid to share it. Thought no one would believe her." Still, Carlson said nothing. He stared at the folder but didn't open it. "Let's move on," Asha continued, her voice low but steady. Because this, she opened a second folder from her side and pulled out a thin stack of surveillance stills. This is from the bar you frequent every Thursday night. That's you. That's your partner. And that's a known member of the Northwest Brotherhood. Carlson's eyes snapped to hers. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered. Asha finally sat. She leaned forward just slightly, voice quiet, personal. You think I stumbled into your trap by accident? You think the timing of my arrival here, the transfer from D.C., the anonymous tips about 2 officers running unchecked patrols through Aurora, you think that was coincidence? Carlson's silence grew heavier. His hands curled into fists on his knees. I wasn't the one under investigation, she whispered. You were. She let it land. Let him squirm. Let the silence stretch between them like a wire tightening with every breath. Why me? He finally asked, voice low, strained. Why'd you set me up? Her laugh was small. Not amused, exhausted. I didn't set you up. You set yourself up. You've been doing this for years, Carlson. You don't even realize when you're being watched anymore. You don't question it. You assume you're invisible, untouchable. That's what makes you dangerous. He leaned back, shoulders rigid. You think you're gonna end me with a couple files and a speech? You know how many people in this town have my back. She leaned in again. I don't need everyone. I just need the right ones. And you've made a lot of enemies in high places. She pushed the file slightly closer to him. There's a warrant being signed right now to search your home. Your accounts are frozen. Your supervisor has already been placed on leave. Internal Affairs has been ordered to reopen every closed complaint involving you or Wolf. This is bigger than one bad arrest. It's about systemic abuse. You're not just going down, you're becoming the face of everything you thought you were protected from. Carlson looked down at his hands. His voice, when it returned, was quieter. You don't know what it's like. What we deal with out there. You show up in a suit and think you've got it all figured out. You think every stop is about color. Sometimes it's just about gut instinct. Asha's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. You call it instinct. I call it legacy. You think you're keeping order, but all you're doing is recycling fear. You're not protecting your community. You're policing your prejudice. He looked away, jaw working, throat bobbing. In the next room, Wolf's voice cracked through the intercom system behind the glass. The agent with him was recording. Wolf was crying now, begging. Explaining how Carlson always pushed things too far, how he told him to stay quiet, to write the reports a certain way, how he didn't want to do it but felt trapped. I thought she was just another. I didn't know, his voice broke into gasps. Asha stood again, took the folders, tucked them under her arm. She walked to the door but paused before leaving. Carlson didn't lift his eyes. You thought the badge protected you, she said softly, but today, it buried you. She left the room without slamming the door. She didn't need to. The sound of his silence was louder than anything else. In the hallway, Ramirez waited. They're both going to be suspended immediately. Charges will follow after the audit is done. You good? Asha nodded slowly. It's not about being good. It's about being done right. Ramirez smiled. Hell of a move back there. It wasn't a move, Asha replied. It was overdue. As they walked toward the elevator, the air shifted. The building no longer felt cold, it felt finished. But Asha knew this wasn't the end. This was a ripple. And ripples become waves. The media hadn't touched the story yet, but they would. And when they did, people would watch the footage, hear the recordings, see the confessions. They'd ask why it took so long. Why no one stopped them sooner. But the better question would be, what happens when the people you ignore decide to stop waiting? Because the most dangerous kind of justice isn't the one that comes loudly, it's the one that walks in quietly, takes notes, and waits for the perfect moment to speak. And that moment had just begun. The press conference had already started by the time Asha stepped out of the federal building, the weight of everything behind her and the eyes of the world in front of her. A sea of microphones pointed toward the podium, flanked by reporters whose faces were tight with anticipation. Flashes from cameras blinked like silent lightning, and beyond them, in the distance, protesters were gathering, not in rage, but in solidarity. Signs were held high with messages like "Justice for all, we see you, enough is enough." Asha didn't take the podium. That wasn't her place today. Ramirez was speaking, laying out the timeline of the investigation, the coordinated arrests that had taken place over the past 48 hours, the dozens of files reopened, and the immediate disciplinary actions already in motion. She heard words like systemic abuse, civil rights violations, zero tolerance. But Asha's focus wasn't on the cameras or the crowd. Her focus was on the pair of men being escorted out through the side entrance in cuffs. Wolf walked with his head down, shoulders slumped, hands trembling. He looked smaller than he ever had, not physically, but emotionally. Like whatever illusion he had of his own authority had finally shattered. Carlson, though, was still fighting the inevitable, even as the metal bound his wrists. His face remained tight, jaw clenched, staring forward like if he just stayed still long enough, he could undo it all. Denial had taken root deep inside him, and it wasn't letting go without a fight. She walked closer as the agents led them toward the secure vehicles. Her presence caused a ripple, heads turning, murmurs rising. Carlson finally noticed her. For a split second, his eyes locked on hers, and something flickered. It wasn't anger. It was fear, not just of punishment, but of recognition. Recognition that the woman he had dragged from her car, humiliated, insulted, diminished, she had been the architect of his fall all along. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the noise when he finally spoke. "You ruined me." She stepped closer, never breaking eye contact. "You did that yourself. I just made sure the world saw it." He wanted to look away but couldn't. The agents tightened their grip, pulling him toward the SUV. Wolf stumbled a bit as they moved, his head twitching toward Asha as he passed. "I didn't want to. I didn't know who you were," he muttered, voice cracking. Her gaze softened, not in pity, but in clarity. "You don't need to know someone to treat them like a human being." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, it looked like he might collapse under the weight of it all. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the vehicles pulled away, leaving a void that felt both final and unfinished. Back inside the building, Asha returned to the room where the files still sat on the table, a storm of paper and truth. Ramirez joined her a moment later, arms crossed, watching the tension settle in her friend's shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, not as an agent, but as someone who knew what it meant to carry that kind of rage silently for so long. Asha nodded, slowly. "I am now." Ramirez sat across from her, tapping her fingers gently against the steel table. "You know this is going to blow wide open. Those two were just the tip. Once the files go public, we're going to see names, badges, command-level people being dragged into this. Are you ready for that?" Asha looked down at the badge on the table, her badge, the same one they had ignored, laughed at, doubted. "I've been ready my whole life." She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that cleared space for something new. "But I don't want revenge," she added, quieter now. "That's not what this was. I want accountability. I want change. I want that kid who gets pulled over next year to be treated with dignity, not suspicion." Ramirez nodded. "You made that happen today. That's bigger than any courtroom win." There was a knock at the door. An assistant leaned in, holding out a phone. "There's someone on the line asking for you. Local official. Says it's urgent." Asha took the phone, pressed it to her ear. "This is Monroe." The voice on the other end was shaky, but familiar. "Miss Monroe, this is Jason Caldwell." I'm the father of one of the officers. Wolf. Asha didn't speak, letting him find the words. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not for him, he needs to face this, I know that. But for what it represents. I raised him better than this. I thought I did. And I guess I failed in ways I didn't see until today. I don't expect you to forgive him. Or me. I just needed you to know there are people out here who are watching. Who are learning. Who are changing because of what you did today. She closed her eyes, letting the words sit in her chest before replying. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Change starts with truth. And you just spoke it. They hung up without further word. It was enough. Later that evening, Asha sat alone on the rooftop of her building, the Chicago skyline flickering in the distance. She held a mug of tea in her hands, not because she needed it, but because the warmth anchored her. Her phone buzzed beside her. Messages. News outlets. Statements. Requests for interviews. But she ignored them all. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up the file she had been building in secret long before any of this happened, a mentorship program proposal for young black girls interested in law, justice, advocacy. She had names, outlines, contacts. But now, she had something more, proof. Proof that one woman's voice, one woman's stance, could shift the balance. The program would be named after her mother. Justice wasn't the end of her journey, it was the beginning of someone else's. And for the first time in a long time, Asha Monroe allowed herself to feel something other than fury, something other than duty. She felt peace. And possibility. In the weeks that followed, the air in Aurora changed. The story had gone national within 48 hours of the arrests, and what began as a local scandal quickly erupted into a federal firestorm. Civil rights organizations flooded the media with demands for full-scale reforms, not only within the Aurora Police Department but across precincts nationwide with similar patterns of racial abuse and cover-ups. Every article that surfaced, every leaked body cam recording, every photograph of Brett Carlson being led away in cuffs only fueled the growing sense that something long hidden was finally being forced into the light. But for Asha, the noise of the world outside was secondary to the quieter storm that had begun to brew inside the institution itself. And more specifically, inside the hearts and minds of the people who used to look right through her. Inside the DOJ office in Chicago, there was a new tone in the meetings, in the hallways, in the way people said her name. Some whispered it with respect. Some with fear. And some, the ones who had sat in rooms with her and questioned her methods or challenged her authority with veiled condescension, now seemed to choose their words with more caution. Not because she demanded it, but because they had seen what she was capable of when she chose to act. Asha didn't gloat. She didn't linger in vindication. But she watched. She noticed. And part of her, the part that had spent a lifetime having to prove she belonged, took a silent, measured satisfaction in knowing that her presence was no longer something to be ignored. But satisfaction wasn't justice. It wasn't healing. And it certainly wasn't enough. The mayor had reached out, requesting a closed-door meeting with Asha and the department's regional directors. He wanted optics. He wanted a public show of accountability. But what he didn't expect was for Asha to walk into that meeting not just with policy recommendations, but with names, supervisors who signed off on falsified reports, lieutenants who buried complaints, officers with patterns of abuse that had never been disciplined. She laid it all out without flinching. This wasn't about a single incident anymore. It was about a system designed to shield itself, and if they truly wanted to move forward, that system had to be dismantled. The room was tense. One director leaned back in his chair, arms folded, visibly uneasy. Another spoke slowly, carefully, asking whether pursuing such a broad internal review would damage morale among good officers. Asha's response was quiet, but firm. What damages morale, she said, is expecting people to protect a system that won't protect them back. Accountability doesn't break trust. It builds it. The mayor, who had started the meeting with platitudes about change and community, now sat quietly, his hands folded, eyes downcast. When he finally looked up, he didn't argue. He simply nodded. He knew the political winds had shifted. The story was too big. The footage too clear. The woman sitting across from him too powerful to silence. But outside those polished offices, in the neighborhoods where it mattered most, something more complicated was happening. Carlson and Wolf had become names people knew, faces people recognized. But while many were relieved to see consequences, others, especially within the police force, were beginning to grumble. Some officers claimed they felt abandoned by leadership. Others posted anonymously on forums about being afraid to do their jobs. There was talk of walkouts. Thinly veiled threats of protests by unions. And in the middle of that growing tension stood Asha, the unintentional symbol of what many of them called a witch hunt. The department had placed her under temporary security detail, not because of any formal threats, but because the volume of vitriol she had received online was escalating. Emails. Messages. Handwritten letters slipped under office doors. Some called her a hero. Others called her worse. Much worse. One night, as she returned home under escort, she noticed something taped to her front door, a Polaroid photo of her being cuffed at the gas station, clearly printed from a frame in the original body cam footage. On the back, a message in bold marker, "We remember." The implication wasn't lost on her. Ramirez was furious. This is why they think they can still scare us. Because no matter how hard we hit them, they've survived worse and kept their grip, but Asha wasn't afraid. She was exhausted. Not from the threats, but from the proof that justice, even when served, didn't always shift the soul of a place. Not right away. And maybe not enough. She sat with that for days. The moral weight of it. The sense that no matter how much she pushed, something kept pulling back. That for every wolf who cracked under pressure and wept through a confession, there were 3 more who kept their heads down and waited for the storm to pass. Then came the letter. It arrived in a simple envelope, unmarked. Inside, a handwritten note from one of the young boys who had been detained by Carlson the year before. His name was Malik. He'd been 16 at the time, stopped while walking home from a basketball game. Carlson had claimed he fit a suspect description. Malik was held for 3 hours before being released with no charges, no apology, no explanation. The letter was short. "Miss Monroe, I saw what you did. My mom cried. I didn't know people like you could exist in real life. Thank you for not forgetting us. I want to be like you now." Asha held the paper in her hands for a long time, and in that moment, something in her recalibrated. Because this was the real cost of what she had done, not just exposing rot, not just destroying careers. It was the weight of expectation. The burden of becoming a symbol. And now, she had to decide what to do with that power. She met with Ramirez again the next day. Over coffee, not case files. No badges. No agents. Just 2 women who had been fighting the same war in different ways. "I'm thinking of stepping back," Asha said quietly. "Not quitting. But changing lanes. Maybe public advocacy. Training programs. Legal aid. Community-focused work." Ramirez didn't look surprised. "You've earned that. But are you ready to give up the leverage?" Asha stirred her coffee. "It's not about leverage. It's about impact. I'm not interested in chasing more villains. I want to build shields." Ramirez smiled, not in mockery, but with respect. "Then maybe that's the next war. Not exposing the system, but rebuilding what it broke." That night, Asha sat at her desk and began drafting a speech. Not for TV. Not for awards. For a high school auditorium in the south side of Chicago where Malik and his classmates would be graduating next month. She had been invited to speak. Not as a prosecutor. But as a woman who refused to be erased. She didn't write anything dramatic. No legal jargon. No calls for revolution. Just truth. Raw, real, human. Because the battle was never just about her. It was about every voice silenced before it could rise. Every girl told she was too much. Every boy taught to be afraid. And every badge that became a weapon instead of a promise. The story was almost over. But the lesson, the real lesson, was just beginning. The morning of the graduation, the sky over Chicago was heavy with clouds but dry, the kind of weather that threatened rain but never delivered, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Asha arrived early, walking through the long hallway of Marcus Carter High School where posters of smiling students and motivational quotes lined the beige walls. She paused for a moment in front of a photo collage labeled Class of 2025, scanning the faces until she found Malik's, his grin wide, his eyes defiant, his cap tilted just slightly to the side. He looked free in that photo. Not free of what had happened to him, but free because of what came after, the refusal to let it define him. That was the part that struck Asha the most. The resilience. The continuation. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she made her way to the auditorium, heart beating slow and steady, not from nerves but from the weight of what today meant. This was no longer about courtrooms or confessions. It was about legacy. Not hers, theirs. Inside the auditorium, rows of students in deep blue robes buzzed with anticipation and laughter. Parents shuffled into the bleachers, some holding balloons, others tissues. The principal, a short man with kind eyes and a slight limp, greeted Asha with gratitude that didn't need words. His handshake was firm, his nod full of reverence. "He's been talking about this for weeks," he whispered, gesturing toward the row where Malik sat, fidgeting with his tassel. "Told me he wants to study law now. Said he wants to do what you did, hold people accountable. He said you made him feel seen. No one's ever done that before." Asha blinked slowly, absorbing that like sunlight. When it came time for her to speak, the auditorium dimmed slightly, the crowd quieted, and she stepped up to the podium. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them. She placed both hands gently on the wooden surface, looked out at the sea of young faces, and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here today. Not because of scheduling. Not because of politics. But because for a long time, people like me, people who look like me, who sound like me, who walk into rooms carrying history on our backs, we were never invited to speak. We were spoken about. Judged. Silenced. But something shifted. And not because someone gave me permission. Because I decided not to ask for it anymore." The room was quiet, the silence heavy but sacred. "I know what it feels like to be dismissed before you even open your mouth. I know what it feels like to be underestimated. To be watched, not out of curiosity, but suspicion. And I know the kind of strength it takes to hold your head high when everything around you is trying to make you shrink." She let those words hang for a moment, watching them land. "You will face people who will try to tell you who you are before you even know it for yourself. People who will assign you a story that doesn't belong to you. Write over you. Erase you. Don't let them. Don't give them that power." There was a shift in the room, parents nodding, students locking eyes with her, Malik sitting up straighter. Because every time you walk into a room, you carry more than your name. You carry your ancestors. You carry your community. You carry a truth that can't be stolen, even when it's ignored. And if I can leave you with anything today, it's this: don't just chase justice. Become it. Thunder rumbled faintly outside as she stepped down, the applause growing into a standing ovation. Not loud. Not wild. Just sincere. Grounded. Earned. After the ceremony, as the crowd spilled into the halls, Malik found her near the exit. He stood there for a second, unsure of what to say, gripping his diploma with both hands. "I thought I was broken," he said finally. "After that night. I thought I'd never be able to be, more than that moment. She looked at him, her gaze steady. You weren't broken. You were cracked open. And what came out was power. He swallowed hard, eyes glossy. Thank you. Not just for me. For all of us. Asha smiled, touched his shoulder, and nodded. Now go prove them wrong. As he walked away, a woman approached from the crowd. She looked familiar, older, tired eyes, elegant frame, the same bone structure as Wolf. She introduced herself as his sister. I don't want to excuse anything he did, she began, her voice low, deliberate. But I wanted you to know that what happened, it shook him. It broke something in him that needed to be broken. Asha didn't respond immediately, sensing that the woman wasn't done. He's in therapy now. Voluntarily. First time he's ever admitted he needed help. He's writing letters, to you, to the people he hurt, to himself. I read one. It was messy. Angry. Honest. He's not asking for forgiveness. Just trying to figure out who he really is when the badge isn't there to hide behind. Asha nodded slowly, a complex blend of emotions rising in her chest. People think justice is a finish line, she said quietly. But sometimes it's just the start of accountability. The woman reached into her bag and handed her a letter, sealed, with Asha's name in carefully printed handwriting. I told him I'd deliver it. Whether you read it or not, that's your choice. Asha took it gently. Thank you. That night, in the quiet of her apartment, Asha sat by the window, city lights dancing on the glass. She held the letter in her hands for a long time before finally opening it. The handwriting was shaky. The words stumbled at first, unsure, but then sharpened into something that felt real. Miss Monroe, there's no excuse. I've spent weeks trying to find one. But the truth is, I acted like I had nothing to learn. I wore the badge like armor, like it gave me the right to be cruel. You took that armor off with the truth. And underneath it, I didn't like what I saw. I don't expect redemption. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I'm trying to start something I've never done before. Listen. If you ever do read this, thank you for making me face what I was. It won't be wasted. D. Wolf. Asha folded the letter slowly, placed it on her desk, and looked out the window. The city hadn't changed. Not yet. But somewhere in its streets, a boy had found his voice. A man had begun to rebuild his conscience. And a system had been cracked, just enough for light to start bleeding through. She closed her eyes, and in the silence that followed, she felt it, not peace, not closure, but purpose. It was still fragile. Still unfinished. But it was real. The days that followed were quieter, not in the sense that the storm had passed, but in the way that the world seems to hush when the dust is settling and people are looking around to see what's left standing. Asha returned to her routine, though it didn't feel like a routine anymore. Everything she did, each email she answered, each case she reviewed, each walk through the DOJ's tall glass doors, carried new meaning. She had become something she didn't ask to be, not fully, a symbol. It was a strange thing, bearing the weight of a moment that had started with violence and grown into transformation. She wore it with pride, yes, but also with caution, because she understood now that change wasn't a thunderclap, it was the slow, persistent rumble underneath the surface that made people uneasy, made them reconsider everything they thought they knew. That week, she was invited to a city council hearing. Not to testify, but to observe. The mayor, still grasping for solid footing, had pushed a motion to create an independent oversight board composed of civilians with power to review police misconduct cases. Asha took a back seat in the chamber, dressed in her usual dark suit, hair tied back, eyes calm but unblinking. She listened as the room debated. She watched council members argue over definitions of authority, the limits of oversight, the language in the policy that allowed too much or too little. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shifted the tone. People looked over their shoulders as they spoke, checked their notes twice before making claims. At one point, a councilwoman paused mid-sentence, then said, "We cannot talk about accountability in this city without acknowledging the work that Ms. Monroe has done, and the price she paid for doing it." A murmur spread across the chamber. Asha didn't flinch, but the words landed harder than she expected. Not because of the recognition, but because of the phrasing. The price she paid. She thought about that. She thought about the hours she'd spent reassembling herself after what had happened, the letters she still received, some grateful, some threatening. She thought about how she had changed. There was a version of herself that existed before that night at the gas station, and that version was gone. Not lost. Just, evolved. After the hearing, in the corridor outside the chamber, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Jordan Price, an old colleague from D.C., someone she hadn't seen in years, but who had followed the news with great interest. "I thought I might find you here," he said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Asha crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "Didn't expect to be found." Jordan laughed softly. "You forget who trained you." They stood in silence for a beat before he spoke again, this time more serious. "I've been watching all this. And I need to ask, are you okay?" Asha tilted her head slightly. "You mean physically? Legally? Emotionally? All of it?" She took a breath. "I'm still standing. But no, I'm not okay. I don't think you go through something like this and come out untouched. But I'm clear. Clearer than I've ever been." Jordan nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "This came across my desk last week. We've been looking into misconduct reports tied to similar behavior in 3 other cities. Aurora wasn't isolated. We think this goes deeper. We think it's networked." She took the envelope carefully, flipping it open just enough to see pages of names, scanned documents, internal memos. Her stomach turned. Not in surprise, but in inevitability. Of course it went deeper. Of course this wasn't just a local rot. This was the water. And she had only drained a single well. "You're the only person I trust to lead this," Jordan said. She looked up, eyes narrowing. "I told you, I'm stepping away from prosecution." "This isn't prosecution," he replied. "It's strategy. Reform. Leadership. We need someone who knows the system and isn't afraid to hold it accountable. We need someone the public believes in. Someone who already did the impossible." She closed the envelope, her thoughts racing. This wasn't what she planned. Her future was supposed to be quieter, more intentional, built around education, advocacy, rebuilding. But this was the door that opened only once, and she knew it. A new layer of responsibility, bigger, heavier, more dangerous. "What if I say no?" Jordan shrugged. "Then someone else takes it. And they probably don't do it right." The weight of that truth settled between them. She looked down at the envelope again. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass frame on the wall beside them, sharp, defined, unyielding. Later that night, she sat on the floor of her apartment, barefoot in sweatpants, the files spread out around her like puzzle pieces. Reports of misconduct. Emails. An internal document listing supervisors who had rerouted complaints through special processing. Cities she'd never been to, names she didn't recognize, but patterns that were too familiar to ignore. She called Ramirez, who answered on the first ring. "It goes beyond us," Asha said. "I figured," Ramirez replied. "You going to take it?" There was a pause. "I don't know yet." Ramirez sighed, but not in frustration, more in understanding. "You know the hardest part about surviving something like what you went through?" she asked. "It's not the healing. It's the decision about whether to re-enter the fight. When you've already bled once, the idea of bleeding again feels unbearable. But if anyone's built for that, it's you." Asha didn't sleep that night. She stayed at her desk, watching the city lights flicker out one by one. Somewhere below, someone was being pulled over, someone was walking alone, someone was scared and didn't know why. She thought about Wolf's letter again. Thought about Malik. Thought about the mothers who had cried for sons who never came home, who never got apologies or justice or even a headline. The fight wasn't over. It wasn't even close. But maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Maybe it was meant to be carried by those who never stopped believing that justice was worth the wait. And maybe, just maybe, that meant her. Because the truth was simple. They tried to silence her. They failed. Now they'd have to listen. The decision came quietly on a Tuesday morning, without ceremony. Asha walked into the Department of Justice not as a prosecutor, but as the newly appointed Director of National Integrity and Policing Reform. A position that, until then, didn't exist. She hadn't planned to accept it. But after nights spent rereading letters, revisiting files, and listening to the stories behind the numbers, she understood that stepping away might have been easier, but it would have left the cracks unattended. And unattended cracks become fractures. So, she chose to lead. She chose to rebuild, not for recognition, but because she could. And because someone had to. The office was small but hers. No portraits. No plaques. Just a window, a desk, and a board where she pinned cases that needed intervention, real ones. Her staff was hand-picked, diverse, relentless, and grounded in truth. Together, they didn't just review misconduct, they dismantled the shield that had protected it. Slowly. Deliberately. Systemically. Carlson was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison on multiple counts of civil rights violations, falsification of official records, and obstruction of justice. His trial was public, and his defense, riddled with excuses and denial, fell flat against overwhelming evidence. The courtroom watched in silence as the body cam footage, suppressed reports, and testimonies were laid bare. There was no applause when the verdict was read, only a collective exhale, as if the room had been holding its breath for years. In prison, he remained mostly silent. No interviews. No statements. Just a name remembered for the wrong reasons, filed into history as a warning, not a martyr. Wolf, after cooperating fully with federal investigators and submitting to psychological evaluations, was offered a deal. In exchange for testimony, full accountability, and a commitment to community reparations, he was spared prison time but barred permanently from law enforcement. He spent the next year volunteering with youth programs in underfunded neighborhoods, not as an act of redemption but of responsibility. One evening, he stood quietly at the back of an event where Asha spoke, not seeking recognition, just listening. Their eyes met briefly. She gave a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. A silent agreement that progress comes not from perfection, but from confronting the worst parts of ourselves and choosing something better. Ramirez remained in her role, climbing higher within the bureau. She and Asha worked together often, sometimes clashing, always respecting. They built bridges between departments that had once refused to speak. She often joked that Asha had turned the DOJ into a place that actually scared people for the right reasons. They didn't always win. But they never stopped fighting. Malik graduated top of his class in college, then earned a scholarship to law school. He kept a photo of that graduation day in his dorm, Asha standing beside him, one hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling without pretense. He interned with her office the summer before his final year, working quietly through files with the same fire that once burned in her. She saw in him not just potential but legacy. A living example of what it meant to survive and still believe. And Asha, she thrived. Not in the traditional sense, not in spotlight or fame, but in purpose. She traveled across the country meeting with communities, police departments, and schools. She rewrote training manuals. She helped pass legislation. She never ran for office. She never needed to. Her power wasn't in titles. It was in action. She lived her truth out loud, unapologetically, carrying herself not as a symbol, but as a force. Her name became a reference point, the standard others were measured by, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. Her father passed peacefully one autumn, proud, hands folded, knowing his daughter had become something bigger than even he imagined. At the funeral, officers from across the country showed up, not to mourn, but to honor. Because her father raised her, and she changed them. Years later, standing at a podium in Washington, Asha delivered a national address after the passing of a new federal law mandating body cam transparency and the creation of an independent civilian oversight panel in every major city. She looked into the camera, speaking not as a politician, but as a woman who had once been thrown against her own car and mistaken for a threat. "I am not standing here because justice was handed to me," she said. "I am standing here because I refused to leave until justice arrived. And I am telling every child watching this, especially the ones who've been silenced, dismissed, and dehumanized, that your story isn't over. It hasn't even begun." The applause echoed, but more importantly, so did her message. Now, take a moment. Think about what you've just witnessed. Not just a story of pain, but of power. Not just a fall from grace, but a rise from silence. How many times in our lives do we witness injustice, feel that fire in our chest, but look away because we think nothing will change? How often have you or someone you know been judged without being seen, been spoken over instead of spoken to? This story wasn't built on fantasy, it was built on truth, shaped by experiences that too many know too well. It's a reminder that one person can dismantle a system, not by shouting the loudest, but by refusing to step aside. Now I want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Did you see yourself in Asha? Or maybe in Malik? Maybe even in Wolf, if you're honest enough to admit it. Let's talk about it in the comments. Share your truth. Because stories like this one, they start conversations. And conversations create movements. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, reflect, subscribe to Tales of Twist. There's more where this came from. Because truth, when told right, doesn't end, it echoes.